The disappearance of Jodi Huisentruit. It was still dark when the first call came in. June 27, 1995. Mason City, Iowa. A small town where the loudest sound at dawn was usually the chirp of birds and the low hum of early commuters. But that morning, the phone rang inside the newsroom of KIMT-TV, and the anchor who should have answered it was nowhere to be found. Jodi Huisentruit, 27 years old, was supposed to be at the station before 4 a.m. She was never late. She had built her career on punctuality, showing up early, cheerful, ready to deliver the morning news. But by 4:30, her producer noticed something strange: no sign of Jodi. Calls went unanswered. A colleague named Amy Kunz tried again and again, until finally, someone picked up, a groggy Jodi, half asleep. She apologized, saying she had overslept and would be right there. That was the last time anyone ever heard her voice. When Jodi didn't arrive by 6 a.m., concern turned to fear. The newsroom went quiet. The morning broadcast had to go on without its anchor. By 7 o'clock, the police were notified. Officers were dispatched to Jodi's apartment complex, the Key Apartments on North Kentucky Avenue, just a few minutes away from the station. What they found in the parking lot made it clear: Jodi hadn't simply overslept. Her red Mazda Miata sat parked, unlocked. Her personal belongings were scattered across the ground: a pair of red high heels, a blow dryer, and her car key, twisted and bent, as if it had been yanked violently. Neighbors later said they'd heard a scream around 4:30 a.m. but thought little of it at the time. It looked like a struggle, sudden, fast, and silent. Jodi's life, up until that moment, had been bright and full of promise. Born in Long Prairie, Minnesota, she had always dreamed of being on television. Her friends described her as ambitious but kind, someone who smiled easily and worked tirelessly. In the weeks before her disappearance, she had mentioned feeling uneasy, that someone might be following her. She had even told a friend she was getting weird phone calls at odd hours. The night before she vanished, Jodi attended a small get-together at a friend's apartment to watch a videotape from a recent birthday water skiing party. That friend's name was John Vancis, a man in his 40s who had become unusually close to her. Jodi had described him as a good friend, though some said he was more attached than she was comfortable with. Vancis was the last known person to see her alive. Investigators quickly began piecing together the timeline. After the gathering, Jodi left around 8 o'clock or 9 p.m. and drove home. She likely went to bed early, knowing she had to be up before dawn for her shift. Sometime between then and 4 a.m., something went terribly wrong. When police combed through her apartment, nothing was missing or disturbed. The door was locked. But outside, in the parking lot, faint drag marks led away from her car toward a patch of grass. A partial palm print was recovered from her vehicle, but it wasn't enough to make a match. At first, suspicion fell on Vancis. He told police that he had been the last person to see her, that they were friends, and that she'd visited him earlier that night. Detectives found it odd how emotionally involved he seemed, even claiming he had taped her birthday party just for her, and often spoke of her as if they were closer than she had suggested. Vancis agreed to a polygraph and allowed police to search his home, car, and camper. No physical evidence linked him to the crime. Yet questions lingered. Why did he insert himself so heavily into the investigation? Why did he talk about Jodi in the past tense so quickly after her disappearance? Still, police had nothing concrete. The next few days turned Mason City into the center of national media attention. Helicopters hovered above the apartment complex. Journalists from across the country arrived to cover the vanishing of a beloved young anchorwoman. Posters went up. Volunteers searched fields, rivers, and wooded areas. Cadaver dogs were brought in. But there were no footprints, no witnesses, no clues, just the eerie silence of a small town suddenly haunted by an absence. As days turned into weeks, new leads surfaced, each more confusing than the last. A witness claimed to have seen a white van near the parking lot around the time of the abduction. Another said they noticed a man jogging nearby who didn't belong to the neighborhood. Police followed every tip, but none led anywhere. Meanwhile, Jodi's co-workers at KIMT-TV tried to hold on to hope. Her desk remained untouched. Her makeup kit still sat beneath the studio lights. A mug with her name on it gathered dust beside the teleprompter. It was as if she'd just stepped away for a moment and never returned. Months passed. The investigation grew colder. But one strange fact kept resurfacing. Jodi had reported feeling unsafe weeks before she vanished. In May, she told friends about a man who followed her while she was jogging. She mentioned getting creepy calls and seeing unfamiliar cars parked near her home. She was worried enough that she attended a self-defense seminar and confided in her producer that she might need a security escort for early morning shifts. Yet no protection was ever arranged. By the fall of 1995, the case had slowed to a crawl. Vances moved out of state, and Mason City returned to uneasy quiet. Still, locals couldn't shake the feeling that someone among them knew exactly what happened and wasn't talking. Then, in 1996, the FBI joined the investigation. Agents re-examined every detail: phone records, bank statements, witness accounts. They found no unusual financial activity, no indication Jodi planned to leave voluntarily. Her passport, credit cards, and clothes were still in her apartment. She had been preparing for a golf tournament and planning to visit family. She had everything to live for. Her mother, Joanne, refused to give up. She appeared on national talk shows, pleading for answers. Years later, she said in an interview, "You just don't vanish into thin air. Somebody knows. Somebody saw." Police continued to receive tips, sightings, confessions, hoaxes, but nothing solid. Some claimed to have seen Jodi alive in other states. Others pointed to men with violent pasts who lived nearby. Every lead ended in disappointment. Then came one of the strangest twists. A man convicted of unrelated crimes told investigators that he had heard another inmate bragging about kidnapping the TV lady from Mason City. Authorities investigated the claim but couldn't substantiate it. The story faded like all the others. By the early 2000s, Jodi Huisentruit's disappearance had become one of the most baffling cold cases in America. With no body, no suspect, and no crime scene, there was nothing to prove, only fragments of fear and memory. But time doesn't erase everything. It only buries the truth deeper, waiting for someone determined enough to dig it back up. And nearly 20 years later, that's exactly what would happen. Because long after the cameras had gone, a small group of strangers would pick up Jodi's case again, armed not with badges or titles, but with the power of the internet. And what they'd uncover would shake the investigation all over again. Years passed. The cameras left, the posters faded, and Mason City slipped back into its quiet rhythm. But for some, the case never ended. A small group of people refused to let Jodi's name disappear. Journalists, former investigators, and ordinary citizens, all haunted by the mystery of a woman who vanished between her alarm clock and sunrise. They came together under one name: Find Jodi. It began as a simple website in 2003, created by two journalists, Josh Benson and Gary Peterson, who were both deeply affected by Jodi's story. They wanted to keep her case alive, to preserve details before time could erase them. But over the years, Find Jodi evolved into something much bigger: a movement, a digital archive, and a beacon for cold case detectives across the country. They began re-examining everything: police reports, witness statements, maps, photographs. They found inconsistencies in early accounts, witnesses who had been ignored, leads that were dismissed too quickly. One of their first discoveries involved the white van. In the initial investigation, several residents reported seeing a suspicious white van parked near Jodi's apartment in the days before she disappeared. Some said it was there almost every morning, idling quietly in the shadows. But by the time police investigated, the van was gone. No one had written down a license plate. Years later, Find Jodi uncovered a forgotten report, one that mentioned a delivery driver who used a similar van and lived in the area. When the website contacted him, he denied any connection. Still, the description matched almost perfectly. The deeper they dug, the more questions surfaced. Why was the parking lot never sealed off properly as a crime scene? Why did neighbors who claimed to hear screams that morning go uncontacted for days? And why were key items, including Jodi's car, returned to her family so soon, before forensic technology had caught up to modern standards. It was as if vital evidence had been lost in a race against time. Over the years, Mason City Police maintained that Jodi's case was active, but locals grew skeptical. The last official update came years earlier, and requests for information were often met with silence. Still, the Find Jodi team persisted. They traveled back to Mason City, interviewed original officers, and reconstructed her final known movements using digital mapping. Every footstep, every timestamp. Then, in 2005, a curious piece of information surfaced. A search warrant from 1995 was quietly unsealed, revealing that investigators had once targeted a man named John Vancis, Jodi's friend and last known contact, as a person of interest. The documents revealed that Vancis had purchased a new van shortly after Jodi disappeared. Detectives searched the vehicle, but found nothing incriminating. It wasn't proof, but it reignited suspicion. Vancis had since moved to Arizona. Reporters tracked him down years later, asking if he still thought about Jodi. He said, "Every day. I loved her like a daughter." But some couldn't shake the feeling that his story never quite added up. In 2017, over 2 decades after Jodi vanished, investigators returned to Mason City's storage vaults and reopened her case files. They examined old evidence with new forensic tools, DNA analysis, trace fiber testing, and enhanced imaging of the palm print found on her car. But even technology couldn't give them the one thing they needed most, a match. Then came a clue from an unlikely place: satellite imagery. A volunteer researcher working with Find Jodi compared aerial photos taken of the Key Apartments complex from 1995 and 1996. He noticed something odd: a patch of disturbed soil near a fence line, barely visible in older images. It had since been paved over. Authorities were notified, but after brief consideration, they declined to dig. There was no direct evidence linking the area to the case. Frustration grew. The Find Jodi team began publicly posting billboard reminders across Iowa and Minnesota, massive signs with Jodi's face and the words, "Someone knows something." It wasn't just an appeal to conscience. It was a challenge. Each billboard stood like a silent accusation, watching over highways, intersections, and the town that still carried her absence. But not everyone welcomed them. In 2020, one of the billboards was vandalized. Someone spray-painted the name, Frank, across Jodi's photo. The word had no immediate meaning. But online, speculation exploded. Who was Frank? Was it a message from someone connected to her abduction, or just a cruel prank? Police never identified who did it. Despite the frustration, Find Jodi pressed forward. They began collaborating with forensic experts, psychologists, and retired profilers who believed Jodi may have been targeted by someone who knew her schedule, someone who had been watching her for weeks. Patterns emerged. The early morning routine. The same route to work. The isolated parking lot. It would have taken minutes, maybe less, to intercept her between her car and apartment door. One profiler suggested Jodi's abductor might have been a power control offender, someone who derived satisfaction from dominating another person's freedom. Another proposed it could have been a familiar stalker, someone emboldened by rejection. But again, there was no physical evidence. Only theories. What haunted the team most was the timeline. At 4 a.m., Jodi answered her colleague's call. She said she'd overslept. By 4:30, witnesses heard a scream. In just 30 minutes, her entire life vanished. It was too efficient, too precise, as if planned. And the silence afterward was almost as chilling as the act itself. No ransom. No calls. No contact. Whoever did it didn't want money or attention. They wanted disappearance. As technology evolved, new investigative methods emerged. Digital forensics could now extract microscopic details from decades-old prints, fibers, and soil. In 2022, Mason City Police announced they were reviewing DNA samples collected from her car with new technology. But whether those tests yielded results remains undisclosed. Every few years, rumors circulate, whispers of confessions, secret tips, even bones found in nearby fields. Each time, the hope flares and fades again. Still, something remarkable had happened. Through Find Jodi, thousands of strangers had become part of the search. Former residents of Mason City returned to share memories. Podcast hosts, investigators, and amateur sleuths pored over every document available. And slowly, a new generation rediscovered her name. For many of them, Jodi wasn't just a victim, she was a symbol. A reminder that beneath every polished broadcast smile, there's a person vulnerable to the darkness that hides in plain sight. Her disappearance had transcended the local news story it once was. It had become a cultural mystery, one that asked bigger questions about safety, obsession, and how fragile a routine can be. In an interview, one Find Jodi member said, "People think she's gone. But she's not. Not really. She's everywhere. In every town where someone walks alone to their car before sunrise and looks over their shoulder." 20 years. No answers. Yet the story refused to die. And then, in 2023, a small but startling development reignited the entire case. A court document surfaced showing that federal agents had executed a new search warrant tied to a location once connected to Jodi's social circle. The details were sealed, but the date, July 2023, was enough to prove something. The FBI hadn't stopped looking. It was the first sign of progress in years. Investigators remained tight-lipped. When asked, they simply said, "We're following new information." But online, speculation erupted again. Could it be tied to the vandalism of the billboard? Was it a re-examination of Vance's, or a completely new lead buried in old evidence? No one knows for sure. But one thing was clear, Jodi's case was no longer frozen in time. And as 2024 began, whispers spread that new technology, genetic genealogy, the same method used to identify the Golden State Killer, might finally be applied to her case. If that happens, decades of silence could end with a single DNA match. Because in the end, every mystery comes down to one truth. Someone, somewhere, still holds the missing piece. By the time the sun rose over Mason City that June morning, Jodi had already become a name whispered across Iowa. Reporters who once worked beside her were now writing her headlines. Police cruisers still circled Kentucky Avenue, retracing steps that seemed to lead nowhere. But behind the scenes, detectives and journalists were beginning to confront the possibility that Jodi's case wasn't random. That whoever took her knew her well, maybe too well. In the weeks after the abduction, the Mason City Police Department received hundreds of calls. Most were dead ends, alleged sightings, distant confessions, psychics offering coordinates. But one report stood out. A woman who claimed she'd seen a white van idling near Jodi's apartment complex around the time of her disappearance. The van was described as an early 1990s Ford Econoline, unmarked, its side windows covered. Investigators tracked down dozens of similar vehicles in the region, from plumbers to delivery companies. None matched. Then came a lead that changed everything, or at least, seemed like it would. A local man came forward saying he'd been near Jodi's building that morning. He told detectives he heard a scream, then saw a figure being dragged toward a van. He said he froze. It was dark, and it happened fast. The description was vague, and the story shifted each time he retold it. Without physical evidence, police couldn't make an arrest. Still, his statement reignited a sense of urgency. Whoever did this had moved fast, clean, and confident. As the summer faded into autumn, the investigation hit its first major stall. The FBI joined in, setting up a dedicated task force. They combed through phone records, bank statements, gas receipts, any hint of movement that morning. But Jodi's accounts remained untouched. No withdrawals. No calls. It was as if she had vanished mid-motion. Her coworkers at KIMT-TV tried to keep the newsroom running, but every broadcast felt heavier. Her desk remained as she'd left it, coffee mug half full, sticky notes about upcoming segments, her favorite pen resting on a stack of index cards. Colleagues took turns reading her morning script for weeks after she disappeared, each time hoping the next headline might be hers. Missing anchor found alive. Months passed. Winter came. Tips slowed. In early 1996, police publicly named a person of interest, John Vances, the friend Jodi had visited the night before she vanished. He was cooperative, even emotional in interviews. He admitted they were close, that he cared about her deeply. But he denied any involvement. His house, vehicles, and property were searched multiple times. Nothing incriminating surfaced. Still, rumors persisted. Neighbors recalled seeing him show Jodi's birthday video at small gatherings, replaying it obsessively. Some found it unsettling, others said it was grief. He soon left Iowa, relocating to Arizona. Over the years, internet sleuths would dissect his every word, every facial expression. But no charges were ever filed. In 2001, Mason City police received an anonymous letter claiming to know where Jodi's body was buried. It pointed to a farm outside town. Crews excavated the land for days, uncovering bones later confirmed to be animal remains. The tip was false, or worse, a cruel hoax. Then in 2019, after nearly 24 years, a breakthrough seemed possible. A warrant was issued to search a GPS-equipped truck once owned by Vansis. Investigators believed the data might reveal suspicious travel patterns around the time Jodi disappeared. The move drew renewed attention from national media, but when the results came back, they offered no definitive proof. Another promising lead faded into uncertainty. Throughout the decades, the case became something larger than one missing woman. It became a symbol of unanswered questions, of how fear lingers long after evidence goes cold. The Mason City community rallied around her family. Billboards went up. Annual vigils continued every June. Former reporters turned investigators, retracing her steps for TV specials and documentaries. Each retelling unearthed something new, a forgotten witness, a misplaced file, a photograph misdated by hours. Yet none of it brought Jodi home. By the 2010s, digital forensics had transformed cold case investigations. Analysts revisited Jodi's phone data, reconstructing call logs and tower pings from archived records. They found something intriguing, a small cluster of calls made to and from Jodi's number in the weeks before her disappearance. The numbers traced back to disposable phones purchased in another state. No identity attached. It was the first technological clue in years, but without surviving records, it couldn't lead further. Still, the digital trail stirred hope. The FBI's cold case division quietly reopened parts of the file in 2020, comparing DNA samples from early evidence, items like her car key, hairbrush, and clothing recovered from the scene, with entries in new national databases. As of today, no matches have been released publicly. Jodi's story persists because it feels so close, a trusted face on the morning news, vanishing from a small, safe community. Her case embodies what makes true crime endure, the illusion of normalcy shattered by something inexplicable. Every detail, the scream in the parking lot, the coffee mug left behind, the van that never existed, forms a puzzle that refuses completion. For years, Jodi's family has resisted declaring her legally dead. They believe, or at least hope, that one day someone will talk. That maybe guilt will weigh too heavy. That a forgotten photograph, a misplaced piece of evidence, will surface from a box labeled miscellaneous. Because cases like Jodi's don't end, they just sleep, waiting for attention. Every documentary and podcast brings a new wave of eyes, and sometimes that's all it takes. One viewer recognizing a face. One listener remembering a detail. If you followed this far, ask yourself, why did Jodi's story survive when so many others faded? Maybe because deep down, we all feel like we knew her. The anchor who greeted a town each morning, smiling through the static, unaware that her final broadcast would be the one she never made. And so, the question still stands, what happened to Jodi? Was she taken by someone she trusted? A stalker who'd studied her routine? Or did a hidden thread of local secrets pull her into something much darker? Until that truth is found, her story remains a haunting echo, a reminder that safety can be an illusion, and that sometimes the most familiar faces hide the deepest mysteries. If you believe her story deserves answers, subscribe, like it, share it, and talk about it to keep her name alive. Because silence is what lets these stories fade, and light is what brings the truth back into view.